Hello, good people, and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History, Spiritual Quest, where we're moving through chapter 10 of the book of John, fourth book of the New Testament, and the Impersonal Life by Joseph Benner. We're also wrapping in a few other books that we have annotations from Elvis on the pages. And we're doing all that as soon as we come back from this song, Cross on the Circle.
He saw the cross at dawn and said, "It's a good omen, and a dream again." At the break of dawn, through the window pane, he saw a cross in morning rain, white as grace, tall as prayer, calling him to build and share. Not a kingdom, not a throne, but a place of love alone, where laughter rides on horse's breath and peace outshines the fear of death. Come home to the circle and the sign, where the lake reflects the holy line. No one needs money, no one needs fame, just a handshake and a name. Come home where the cross stands tall. Come and share the love of all. Mobile homes and barbecue nights, trucks and trials and porch light rides, the hand-picked heart to share the dream, a mythic village by the stream. This is more than land, it's grace, refuge carved in sacred space, a gift of love to friends and kin, protected from the world's loud din. Come home to the circle and the sign, where the lake reflects the holy line. No one needs money, no one needs fame, just a handshake and a name. Come home, where the cross stands long. Come and share the love of all. Oh, come and share the love of all.
Thank you for gathering here at Hillbilly Cat History, where we remember together and listen for the echoes. And today we're going to hear echoes from Elvis, but we're going to start with the book of John and the Impersonal Life. And we can see a picture of a Bible that Elvis actually owned that Graceland still has, but we've never seen the inside. Hi, Pat. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And this is the book of John, King James Version, chapter 10. This is the version of the Bible that Elvis read the most. This is the one that he grew up with. This is probably the one that he thought of as the Bible. he did move on to more modern translations, especially in the 70s. He liked one called The Living Word. He felt it made it easier to understand God's message, but in the early days, he had a King James Bible. And the first verse is, Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. Well, this starts off with a very confusing passage. So it's saying something about a sheepfold. I believe that's a place where you would keep your sheep. That's a safety area, like a barn, maybe, or an enclosed field somewhere. I'm assuming to keep the sheep away from predators. And therefore, if you don't come in by the door, which is where the people that own the sheep would come through, then you're coming in some other way. You're like a fox or a weasel. You're sneaking into the hen house and you're stealing some chickens. Or you're a wolf. You've come in to get these sheep, but you didn't come in through that door. And it's saying climbeth up some other way, so it's probably over a fence or a wall of some kind. And then it's saying you're known to be this thief or robber because of the way that you entered. It had to do with a posture that people who are not thieves and robbers come through the front door. Now, this might have resonated with Elvis because his friends, they came in the front door. At least that's what he told Dick Grobe. Now, in reality, the friends really came through the back door because that was the family door. But he was indicating to Dick that everyone can come through the front door that are his friends. He's not ashamed to have anyone know who his friends are and who they are not. And this says, But he that entereth in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. So that's kind of what we just figured out ourselves, that if they come in through the door, they must own these sheep. And in verse 3, To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. Now, what's a porter? Well, that's a guy who's inside that's there to guard the door. And the shepherd is calling out to the guy inside, and the guy inside opens the door. This is kind of interesting because in the time of ancient Rome, when this is happening, if you went to Rome, the rich people lived in enclosed houses that they enclosed like all the land that they owned. And then there were like open areas behind the house. They were surrounded by walls, but they didn't have a roof over them. Those were like their gardens. But the front of the house actually looked just like a big blank wall. It was like the back of a house, really. It's not like us. We put a huge presentation into the front of the house, typically. They didn't. It was about security. And they had a door, but it was a very defensible door. And they employed a slave in most cases, although sometimes it was a free guy that they paid. And there was a little bed behind that door, like off cut into the wall. And that's where that guy would sleep. And he was the porter. His job was to defend that door. A lot of the rich people, they would purchase or hire ex-gladiators because they were tough fighters and they looked intimidating at the door. And then that was that guy's job, to determine who could and could not come in through the door. So the porter was kind of a big deal back then. Now, I don't know what level of society you were at if you were a porter inside the sheepfold. Now, maybe they're all keeping their sheep together. Maybe it's a community thing. And one guy is inside to kind of handle all the sheep while they're in there until the shepherds each come back to get them. I don't really know. But that man does know who he's supposed to let in. Now, this has a reflection in Elvis's life because he employed people that let people in and out of his gate, like Uncle Vester. They were his porters. And in verse 4, and when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. So this shepherd, he has a relationship with the sheep. It's a personal relationship, and they know his voice. This is a reflection from, or that is also in the Impersonal Life, when Joseph Benner discusses the I am, the voice of God which lives in your heart, and which you have direct communication with God, a two-way street. They know his voice. You know the I am's voice in your heart is what Joseph Benner says. And that's just like these sheep that know the shepherd's voice. And in verse 5, a stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of the stranger. This is a line about discernment. God gifts us with discernment, and we're able to discern or distinguish the voice of the I am from the interference, from the misalignment, from the sin. Those are all basically words for the same thing. Sin equals misalignment, equals turning away from God, equals interference with the voice of the I am. And so when you hear a voice that is not the I am, you know. That's what the Bible's telling us. We know those voices. Sometimes we allow them to fool us, or we prefer to listen to the other voices. But we know when it's God and when it's not. This might have also had a parallel in Elvis's life. Again, Elvis is not Christ. Christ is not Elvis, but Christ's life gives us a mirror of everybody's life. Somewhere in his life, there is a reflection of us, and that's why the Bible works to speak to everybody. But in this particular passage, there are artists from the very beginning of Elvis's career who mimic Elvis. They try to sound like Elvis. They try to look like Elvis. They try to sing like Elvis. They try to model themselves after Elvis. But Elvis fans always know the voice of Elvis. There was a guy that got really a little bit popular after Elvis passed away. His name was Jimmy Ellis. And he was Orion. He went out in a mask and he sang Elvis songs, and his hair kind of looked like Elvis's. And his voice, he had a voice that really does sound like Elvis. And he was a great singer. And he had a lot of problems because nobody would publish his music because he sounded like Elvis until Elvis passed away. And then they wanted him to be a mimic of Elvis. And he made some money at it, and he did it for a while. Some people said they believed he was Elvis, but most people knew immediately that that's not Elvis. They could tell by his voice. And in verse 6, this parable spake Jesus unto them, but they understood not what things they were which he spake unto them. This is also reflected in the impersonal life, because it says over and over, there's a lot of stuff you're going to read in this book and you're not going to understand. And it's okay. The book is meant to be confusing. It's meant to be read at multiple levels. It's meant to spiral around ideas and introduce them over and over, look at them from various angles. They're not all going to make sense. One way to think of it is as perspective. And you can think about it as recognizing a person's face. If you are fairly close to a person, a couple of feet, 5 feet, maybe 10 feet away, you probably can recognize their face if you know them. If you're further away from that, it becomes more difficult. If you're extremely close to where you can only see their cheek, it's very, very difficult to determine who that person is simply by sight. It's because of perspective. That's what the book is doing over and over, and what the Bible does. It spirals around ideas. It brings you in closer and further away so that you can see these from various angles and distances. And in this instance, they did not understand the parable. They weren't able to make sense of the spiral. And it's okay, because Jesus gave them the parable to think about. It's there for them to consider. And there will be other parables that speak about the same thing. And as the Impersonal Life says, the word comes in many forms. Once you've seen the lesson will continue to repeat until you understand. That's the purpose of the spiral. And in verse 7, it says, Then Jesus said unto them again, Verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep. That's very interesting, because I would have expected him to say, I'm the shepherd. I mean, I think we're supposed to see ourselves as the sheep. But Jesus says that he is the door. And that those who come to you outside of Jesus, not through Jesus, those who are not reflective of the voice of the I Am when they speak to you, they didn't come through the door. So what does that mean? Well, let's look back up to the very first verse. It says that those people are thieves and robbers. Those people are misalignment. They are interference. They are trying to push you into solitude, where you can feel no love, where you can send no love. And Jesus is telling us to beware of these people. He is the door. People who come to you, voices, ideas, thoughts, whatever it is, if it reaches you and it did not come through Jesus, if you do not see the reflection of the I Am, that's interference. And in verse 8, all that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. So Jesus is saying there's been a lot of these people. They've come and they've told you a lot of things. They've tried to make you believe this or that. But you didn't hear them because they're not resonating in your heart. They are not the voice of the I Am. You do not see truth in what they say. And in number 9, it says, I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. This one's very interesting. Jesus has already told us he's the door. And through him, any man can enter. And that person is then saved. That's the belief in Jesus. That is alignment. That is hearing the voice of the I Am. That is following the instructions of the I Am. That you can enter and you can commune with God. And that you shall go in and out. That's in and out of alignment. We attempt to stay in alignment, but we can't always be there. It's like a car that we're driving. We've had the front end aligned, but we're going to hit potholes. We're going to drive off the road. We're going to hit those brakes real hard. And we're going to eventually throw ourselves out of alignment. And then we've got to go back in for maintenance. The maintenance is the going in. The coming out is heading back out into the secular world. You take your alignment with you for a short period. You try to hang on to it, but you're going to go in and out. And Jesus is telling you right here that he recognizes that. You're going to come in, we're going to commune, you're going to leave, you're going to experience the mortal realm, and then you're going to come back. We're going to repeat this over and over. You might even think of it as spiritual hygiene. I mean, you're not just going to brush your teeth once in your life and now you've brushed your teeth. You got to do it over and over and over. And you're going to find pasture. Pasture is peace, contentment, freedom from pain, joy. All these things are pasture. And it's part of being in alignment. I think Elvis would have resonated with this because it says, shall go in and out. That is the experience of life. That was what he was experiencing and what he saw in others. In verse 10, the thief cometh not, but for to steal, and to kill, and to destroy. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. Hi, Deborah. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. In this one, he's saying that the thief cometh to steal, to kill, destroy. Now, Joseph Benner would say this is misalignment. This is driving you towards solitude. That on the compass, which is an analogy I've made up to help us try to understand what Benner's talking about, alignment is north, Jesus is north. Misalignment is south, pure misalignment, and all the other directions on the compass are somewhere in between. And we live somewhere in between. So the stealing, the killing, the destroying, these are ways to push us away from God and to keep us from love. It's really love that is the key to all of Benner's thoughts about the Bible. And that when we are in solitude, self-imposed solitude, God does not punish us this way. We choose to misalign. We allow ourselves to become misaligned, and then we start leaning into it. And it's those thoughts of misalignment, those other external voices, those are stealing and killing and destroying our relationship with God, our alignment. And then it says, I have come that they might have life. Because God, Jesus, has promised us that through belief in Jesus, you will have eternal life, which for Joseph Benner is unity. We're all going to return to unity. Even Lucifer will at some point return to unity, but those who are willfully moving through misalignment, there's going to come a time when all the veils are lifted and they can no longer hide from the pain and suffering, those things that they have done to other shards of the divine. And they will then impose further punishments on themselves, unable to hide from God, but attempting to, just as Adam and Eve fled in shame from the Garden of Eden. But at some point, everybody's going to feel the forgiveness and return to the unity. In 11, it says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. And this is a reference to the crucifixion, but it's also an instruction to those who will shepherd, such as Elvis. Elvis believes he is a shepherd. Elvis lives the life of a shepherd. He has gathered his family and his friends, his sheep. He continues to gather more of them. At his concerts, he communes directly with his sheep. And we're not using the word sheep to belittle anybody. It's the same way that Jesus is using it in the Bible as a loving term for those you care for and who are dependent upon you. And Elvis has a lot of those people. And he's being told here that the expectation is he will give his life for these people that he cares about. And I think Elvis takes this very, very seriously. This is one of the driving motives in Elvis's life. Now let's stop there for a moment and move over to something Elvis actually wrote. Which is this page from The Prophet, which is a book that June Wanico, one of the Elvis's early girlfriends, she says that she is the one who gave Elvis the first copy of this book. But it truly spoke to Elvis. This is one of those books he bought many copies of and he gifted out. This particular copy we don't have much provenance on. From what we've looked at already, it truly feels like a working copy. A copy that is personally Elvis's in the sense he wrote these notes for himself, for his future studies, for his thoughts in the moment. You can see his writing on the page, and you can see where the pen has not completely been lifted from the page. You can see malformed letters. Elvis is writing in haste. He's trying to get these thoughts out of his head and onto the paper. This indicates that these are very early thoughts or immediate reflections upon the text. And at the top, let's just start there. Now, there are places that Elvis is underlined. Underlines probably mean resonance, that he saw truth in these passages. He's connecting it to probably the Bible, but other places. Where he has not underlined means he's not seeing as much resonance. It doesn't mean a lack of resonance. It means not as much resonance, although perhaps it is a lack. Perhaps Elvis doesn't agree with these sections. I think what else is important to note, Elvis has not crossed anything out. Elvis doesn't cross things out. Joseph Benner and the ideas that Elvis follows are not about cutting pieces of ourselves away. They're not about removing thought. They're not about blaming ourselves for misaligning. It's all about orientation and posture, that we must always be facing God. And that when we find ourselves in a moment where we are not facing Him, and we recognize this, the proper action is not to feel shame or to blame yourself or to do anything else like that, because it's just adding more and more interference. The proper thing to do is just turn to God. He knows you turned away. You're not hiding it from Him in any way. The proper thing to do is to turn to God, according to Joseph Benner. And it appears from what Elvis is thinking. So Elvis doesn't cross anything out because everything is a gift from God. And it's possible you just don't understand the gift in the moment. So you don't cross anything out, you save it for later. It's either there to tell you, here's future resonance, or it's there to tell you there's no resonance here and your thinking's been correct. And that's why he keeps it in here. But let's start at the top, and it says, and now you ask in your heart, how shall we distinguish that which is good and pleasure from that which is not good? Elvis is underlined, which is good and pleasure from that which is not good. Elvis has access to nearly unlimited physical pleasure, material goods. And so he's asking, in this underline, it appears, what is good that I have and what is not good? Have I bought objects that are pushing me away from God? Have I participated in pleasures that are interfering with alignment? How do I know the difference? Now, he doesn't underline distinguish. It's possible he's already able to distinguish, and so he doesn't need that part. The part he needs is an affirmation that there are good things that are given to us for our pleasure here on earth, and there's ways to use them in a good manner, but there's also ways to allow them to overcome your thinking, and then they become interference. The next passage says, go to your fields and your gardens. And Elvis has underlined fields and your gardens. These would be places that you've planted things, that you're expecting a harvest, or that you're working towards a harvest. A place where you labor, foreseeing an eventual something that will come to you eventually. Not there in the moment, because you're working on these fields and gardens. So I would think that in spiritual terms, and maybe what Elvis is thinking is his fields and gardens are the people he has implanted these ideas within. Those to whom he's given the text, those to whom he sang the gospel songs, like his fans, those who he's given the gospel albums. So it says, go to your fields and gardens, and you shall learn that it is the pleasure of the bee to gather honey of the flower. Now, Elvis has not underlined this portion, but for Elvis, I would think that the honey of the flower is the love that is returned from the fans. That in those moments of his concerts, which he loved to give, and he talked about that he felt a connection to the fans. That is the honey from the flower. Hi, Mysterium. Thank you so much for coming. And you're saying that this looks like Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. That's good recognition, because that's exactly what this is. A very important book to Elvis. These are Elvis's notes, what he's written, and what he's underlined. The text goes on and it says, but it is also the pleasure of the flower to yield its honey to the bee. So for Elvis, this might have been saying, your audience has great pleasure sending you their love. Now, again, Elvis hasn't underlined this. And everything I'm reading into the text or interpreting from it, that's my opinion. You feel free to have your opinion and put it into the chat and put it into the comments. Nobody's wrong here. We're just trying to understand Elvis better and connect the thoughts that he writes here to the impersonal life, which he also loved, and the Bible, specifically the book of John, and other books that we find Elvis has written in. this goes on and it says, "For to the bee a flower is the fountain of life, and to the flower a bee is a messenger of love. And to both bee and flower the giving and the receiving of pleasure is a need and an ecstasy." This is interesting because it's noting for us that certain pleasures, well, they're not just pleasures, they're needful. We need them here in the secular plane, such as reproduction. Without reproduction, we don't have any more of people. And without people, we don't have anyone to express God's divine attributes here in the mortal plane, as Joseph Benner has told us is the plan in the long run. That's why people exist, to be a medium, or to be in this medium in which God expresses himself. Much like a poet expresses himself through his pen onto a piece of paper. And he gives us his poem through the paper, through the medium of the paper, but in truth, the poem is always within the poet. And then it says, "People of Orphalese, be in your pleasures like the flowers and the bees," which I think is just a blessing, to not be afraid of pleasure. That it's not a fear of pleasure, you just need to be able to discern. And we saw in the book of John that discernment is one of the things we were being told about. God gives you the power to discern. You know the I am's voice from those who are not the I am. And Elvis has written, "Everything is not always evident in God's plan." That's a very important line for anybody that's on a spiritual quest. There are mysteries that are beyond us. We are not capable of understanding the divine mind. We are shards of the divine. We intuit certain pieces of God's plan, but we are not privy to all of it. And we have a whole lot of interference in the way. That's part of existing here on the mortal plane. Everything is not always evident in God's plan. I think Elvis is also telling us that he can't see the whole plan either, and that he's trying to decipher his portion in it. He knows there is a plan, and he has faith, but he knows there's pieces that are not evident. And then he says, things must grow in God's garden. Things must grow in God's garden. There's different ways to look at that sentence. It could be an affirmation that anything in God's garden, simply through the gift of God's love, must grow. There is no other choice. Or it could be a declaration of intent, or the feeling that this must happen. Things must grow in God's garden. That Elvis may not know God's garden, but he knows that things must be growing there. Or that if you step into God's garden, then you yourself must grow. And that there's spiritual growth to be had, that we are not stagnant, that our spiritual life is continually expanding, a mirror to the universe that we live in, which continually expands. And then Elvis says, there is always a plan, even if it is not clear to us. This is a restatement of the first thing he wrote. Everything is not always evident in God's plan. There is always a plan, even if it is not clear to us. And in the middle, he has sandwiched that You're going to grow in God's garden. That is the plan. It's not all of the plan. It's not all clear to us, but part of it is you're going to grow when you're in God's garden. Let's flip over to this cheat sheet that I have, where I have tried to create verbal equations that distill the impersonal life, which is also an excellent way to understand how Elvis was looking at the Bible in the time period after he started using the impersonal life. I think this also reflects his view of it before, but that he did not have the vocabulary that he needed in order to describe it. That this quote that we just looked at in the prophet, I think this is something that's written after he has experienced the impersonal life. And so he saw truth always in the prophet, but now he has vocabulary to speak back to the prophet. And that's what he's doing in these pages. He's bringing together the Bible, the impersonal life, the prophet, these hundreds of other books that he's read and that he's seen this resonance in. Let's see if we can find one that resonates with what we've learned in John and the prophet today. I think it's this bottom one on the left-hand column. It says Earth equals divine creation in process. And in parentheses, it's already manifested for the divine. This, I think, connects directly to everything is not always evident in God's plan. There is always a plan, even if it is not clear to us. And that plan is this divine creation and process, which Benner has told us about in the impersonal life. God is expressing himself here in this plane in many different forms. All of his attributes are being expressed, but there's going to come a point where they're going to all collapse into each other into the perfect statement, which we could think of as the single perfect word, capital W, which is also the term that we use for the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit, or love. At some point, everything will collapse back into love. And this has already happened for God because he exists outside of time. And what I think of as the divine now, it's all time, space, place, presence. And we can see that in an equation above. I am God equals all time, space, place, presence. Love is in all things. So truly, we are already all love. Everything is love. Everything is unity. But there's going to come a point where it collapses back into reunification, which is really just where we will lift our blinders and our veils, or they will be lifted from us, and we will recognize that we have never left unity. Yeah, we've already looked at this. So let us flip back to the book of John. And we have a few minutes left, so we'll go through a few more of these verses. 11, it said, I am the good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. And in verse 12, but he that is a hireling, and not the shepherd, whose owns the sheep are not, seeth the wolf coming, and leaveth the sheep, and fleeth. And the wolf catcheth them, and scattereth the sheep. Now this verse, if you're following my other series, which right now we're doing a really deep dive into a phone call that Red West recorded between himself and Elvis Presley in October of 1976, when exactly what is happening as described in verse 12. This is the scenario Elvis finds himself in October of 1976. Red is the hireling. Elvis is the shepherd. He has many people he must care for. And it's a joy to care for them. And it's what he wants to do. But at this moment in October 1976, it is a terrible burden for him. And Red is the hireling. He's not the shepherd. Red believes himself to be equal to the shepherd, but he's not the shepherd. Red keeps comparing himself to the shepherd, but he has not shepherded anyone. Red has taken 2 of the sheep with him. Therefore, he feels he has his own flock. But these sheep are not his. And Red has seen the wolf coming. This is when Elvis is telling Red, these people are stealing $1.3 million from me, Red, for this racquetball court thing. They came through my sheep. They came over the wall. They got Joe Esposito. They got Dr. Nick, my sheep. And then they came to me, and because they came through the sheep, I listened. Because my porter was not at the door. That's Red. Red's the porter. He's the hireling to take care of the sheep when the shepherd's not around. And he's left. And now the wolf has caught Elvis. He's caught him for over $1.3 million, and there's more on the line. And Elvis could lose Graceland. He doesn't tell the hireling that he's about to lose Graceland, but he could. And the sheep are scattered. Red has taken 2 of them. Elvis has thrown out a couple of them. The others are in terror because they see what's happening. There is no pasture at this moment because there's nothing but fear. And fear is a major, major interference with the voice of the I Am. And yet Elvis reaches out to Red and says, Red, this is what's happening. And he implies that Red could still come and save him. But Red can't hear what's being said. Red is seeing himself as the shepherd. And in 13, the hireling fleeth because he is a hireling, and careth not for the sheep. And that's where we're going to leave it for today, because that actually wraps into the next episode that we're going to do about Red. So we're going to stop a little bit early today, but I think this is a really good spot. And I'm going to play for you a song like I always do. But first, I'm going to answer Pat's question. I wonder if Elvis was always into the Bible, or was it after Gladys died? Oh, it was always. You can see their family Bible on display at Graceland. The one that they would have had when Elvis was a child. The one that would have been one of the very few pieces of entertainment that they owned. They didn't have a television. They had a radio, but radios back then ran on batteries. So you had to charge them up, and they only lasted so long, and then you didn't have any radio. Presley's lived without electricity at some times. They didn't have a phone. They didn't have a lot of books because books cost money. They might have gone and got them from the library. We know Elvis had a library card. But that would have left this very expensive edition of the Bible that they owned. We're not sure how they got it. But Elvis was going to church without his parents when he was a child. And in Memphis, there's a lot of references to times that he came to church alone and his parents didn't come with him. So for Elvis, religion was always important. Now, when he was in Memphis going without his parents, some of it is religion, some of it is there's a lot of pretty girls at church. And Elvis could wear his nicest clothes. Nobody was going to get dirty. It was a social gathering for the young people. That's what church was once a week when you're between the ages of 14 and 19. And these young people, they were getting married during those ages. So they're all looking for whoever it is they're getting married to. So some of it was the social aspects of the church. But that's what it was for Gladys as well, because before Elvis, her family was so poor at one point that they didn't have any food when they first came to Tupelo. They were doing very poorly. Gladys had a job, but it was a struggle at that moment. And the church gave them food. They did a welcome wagon thing and brought them a bunch of food. And then every Sunday and on Wednesday nights, there were refreshments that came with the services. And that's how Gladys and her family kind of ate. At least some of the time. That took care of a few calories for them during the week. So church was very important, not just to their spiritual survival, but to their physical survival. And I want to thank each and every one of you for spending your time here with me today. I greatly appreciate it when you come to the lives or you watch on the replays. I really love all the comments that people leave. And if you got anything out of today's episode, I hope you leave a like, that you're subscribed, and that you tell other people you know that love Elvis Presley about Hillbilly Cat history so they can join us here. And now I leave you with this song. It was I Was There.
Midnight lights, rhinestone fire, Arabian suit burning with desire. He hit the stage like thunder rolls, Vegas shook and the story unfolds. Charlie's birthday crowd went wild. He cracked a joke then sang with style. But just before he sang Hurt So Weak, he stopped the show and made us weep. He gave away his heart, not just a song. Diamonds and gold where the love belonged. Rings and shades from the man backstage. He healed the broken, he lit the flame. Oh, he gave away his heart, and I saw it all that night. Back in hand, the man stepped near. Elvis smiled, the crowd could hear. Thanks to you, we raised the light. 17,000 hearts took flight. Then back behind the velvet door, he gave away a little more. A music ring, a boxcar shine, a suit that held a sacred time. He gave away his heart, not just a song. Diamonds and gold where the love belongs. Rings and shades from the man backstage. He healed the broken, he lit the flame. Oh, he gave away his heart, and I saw it all that night. Didn't need applause to know his worth. He gave away his soul in Vegas birth. Not just a king, but something more. A man who knew what hearts were for. He gave away his heart, not just a song. Pieces of love where the brave belong. Ritual gifts from the man backstage. He saved the hurting, he lit the flame. Oh, he gave away his heart, and I'll never be the same. I was there, I saw the rings, I saw the light. he gave away his heart. And it burned so bright.